Hey there, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith. I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data, but there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to my hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Molly Vetter, her senior pastor at Westwood Church. This week, our conversation is about colorblind accessible games, a nursery at the Olympics, the National Park Service, the first candidate for president who's a Black woman, which is very exciting, and more. Welcome to the show, Molly.
Thank you
for joining me. We go way back. This is the first time we have talked in over 20 years. So I am delighted to catch up with you and bring your wisdom to my listeners and viewers. Introduce yourself, please.
Well, I'm so glad to have this occasion to reconnect and to talk about things that matter.
Yes.
I am the senior pastor at Westwood United Methodist Church in Los Angeles, which is very near the UCLA campus. I have been a United Methodist clergy person now for 23 years, serving in congregations in LA and San Diego areas, and have been very active in our denomination, particularly in efforts to finally remove prohibitions against gay clergy and same-sex weddings in our churches at our general conference this year. So that was an occasion for our reconnection, and I'm so glad to be with you today.
Me too. And we've been social media, Facebook friends for a long time. So I've been sort of following along, and you've always been an amazing ally. And it was just sort of so inspiring to see how active you were in helping the church become more LGBTQ plus inclusive. So can you tell folks a little bit about that process and your involvement and where things stand now?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Our denomination is not merely a US-based denomination, but a worldwide one, which has meant that we've moved in some ways slower than other mainline Protestant churches in making this particular change. But there have been anti-LGBTQ plus prohibitions in our we call it the Book of Discipline, our foundational denominational guidebook, since 1972, explicit prohibitions against gay clergy since 1984, and against same-sex weddings since the 1990s. And all along through all of that time, the prohibitions have been added because there have been gay clergy and there have been churches doing same-sex weddings. So it's helpful to me to remember that the rules exist because they were transgressions against what someone else thought was the way to sort of hold the order. So there is this long and deep strain of folks who've been, by their own embodiment and through their advocacy, working for full acceptance and celebration of the gifts of diversity in the church. The church got worse in 2019. There was a special session of our denomination, and there was a hope that it would sort of just like settle the issue. And the church doubled down on exclusions and new penalties for that. And the wild thing that happened in that season is that it became really clear that those punitive rules were out of sync with the character of our churches. And so a much more widespread rebellion against the rules began. People had occasion to speak out more clearly, a necessity to say that that doesn't speak for who we are in all of these local churches and all of these communities across the US. And not every community, right? Like there's still a significant distance to go, but in enough that it created this significant disruption, tension, dissonance within the body of the church that made it possible, these 5 years later from that, to fully and completely remove all of those prohibitions. There's been a falling away, a pulling away of some significant numbers of local churches, almost a quarter of local churches in the US, anticipating this change, who couldn't tolerate even the rebellion against the rules. So it's been an interesting and complicated time, and it has given me lots of pause to think about the role of DEI work in churches, nonprofit institutions, community-based organizations. My goal has always been to make sure that we're helping change the world, right? Like, I'm excited about working for inclusion in the United Methodist Church because we have congregations in all of these communities across the country. And if our church can be a place where a young queer kid knows that they're safe and loved and that there's adults in their community that they can talk to, that could be a profound shift in terms of the safety and well-being of young people in our world. It's good for old people too, right? But just think of that capacity. And my desire is that changing the rule book, I had thought was an important step to get us toward the real change. But in a weird way, after our rules got worse in 2019, the communities began to more clearly change and get more comfortable speaking out against anti-trans, anti-gay practices, policies, behavior in communities, and that makes a real difference. So I've been thinking a lot about what's the relationship between the policy and lived practice. And of course, it's different in an all-volunteer organization like a church than it is in a corporate setting. But both of those are necessary components of the change that I hope for.
I love that. And well, one thing you have in common is we believe our work is to change the world, to save the world. I really appreciate that. And it's beautiful. So you're saying that 5 years ago, things got worse, which then inspired people to mobilize and make things better. And I think that's how a lot of change happens, right?
Yeah, and man, it depending on what stories at the top of the news feed, there are days when it feels like so much is worse than it's ever been or falling apart or more is at stake. So I guess it's helpful to remember the power and authenticity of that long, slow movement for change that changes communities and people at the local level, so that even when the high level visible conversation may suggest something else, there is that progress that comes from people's lives and hearts being changed all along the way.
I love that. It's beautiful. And, it's inspiring to me because as I was writing the newsletter last week, I was, reading the story about how the Society of Human Resources Management is taking equity out of its messaging, encouraging its member organizations and companies to do the same. Equity is more for those who need it, and it actually benefits everyone. And it's something that I think is really critical to actually get to a place of inclusion. Yet, when the messaging and the headlines are so negative, it can be really hard to find the good vibes. But talking to you and hearing your mission, your personal mission, and how it's impacting small communities and how that can impact queer kids is so inspiring to me. And of course, it was inspiring to Saturday or Sunday, I guess it was Sunday, to see the story about President Biden stepping down from re-election. And
thankfully, after my sermon ended, there's nothing worse than preaching and suddenly your whole congregation is in their phones processing something that you're not sure what's happening. But it was definitely at that church hour here in Southern California on Sunday morning when news broke of Biden's withdrawing from the race.
Well, it would be amazing if we had, I guess that's not really would. It would be amazing if we had our first Black woman as president, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel this tremendous hope that comes from this possibility, even this visibility, this new reality. Feels like a lot has shifted in this moment that points me more to a posture of hopefulness.
Absolutely. And I needed it after feeling where are the good vibes? I need that reminder that we have to keep going. And so it's been a good 24 hours. And so I'm excited to see what happens. Well, let's get into this week's stories. All right. So the first story comes from Mattel, which is updating its card games like Uno for players with color blindness. So by year end, 80% of their games will be colorblind accessible. Next year, it'll be 90%. So now that means that Uno features symbols alongside colors. So symbols that are aiding in identification. And this affects 300 million colorblind people worldwide. It's pretty awesome. I had no idea there were that many people who were colorblind.
Yeah, so this is good for my family. I have a child who's colorblind, and he has occasioned me contemplating just how many things in our world really are
Mm.
an additional challenge for him to navigate, and how people think he's like really not smart when he like can't tell. I mean, when he was a little kid, he had a teacher who was trying to decide if he was just being a jerk, like an obstinate
Wow.
jerk that he couldn't learn his color names. But he just couldn't
Wow.
see them. I mean, it's just those split decisions that we have to make about someone who can't tell the difference between the red crayon and the green crayon.
Wow.
But anyway, grateful for Mattel making Uno easier for my family.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that that teacher, like, it seems like that teacher was like the old story about making left-handers write with the right hand. Like, I
Yeah.
can't believe that your son at this age still had to have that experience.
Well,
And I'm glad.
so the story came to me as like a confession after a quick change and a sense of like horror at her horror and self-reflection. So it was not characteristic of her style. It was just that, you're trying to like manage the classroom and you're like,
Sure.
why is this kid always saying the wrong color when it's his turn in the circle?
Yeah, fair enough. All right, the second story this week comes from Caroline's Carts, which are debuting at Walmart. Now, these are shopping carts designed for children and adults with disabilities. They'll be at all stores by January of next year. These carts feature a seat with a buckle near the handle, allowing caregivers to shop more comfortably and safely using a single cart. Now, this can impact tens of millions of people here with disabilities in the US. You've got to see the video of the cart because it actually makes a lot more sense. So I think folks, look it up the video. We'll make sure we put it in the show notes, but it's a really cool cart. And I'm just glad that there are so many things that I take for granted. So I'm glad that more folks are going to be able to shop easier. It's as simple as that.
Same. I clicked through and was moved by the video. I was prepared. I'm at like old sort of mistrust of, I don't know if I should say this on your podcast. Like,
Hey,
I'm a radical preacher, mistruster of like corporate agendas, and Walmart's not usually been my favorite brand, but I think they got this one right.
You know what, Molly? You would be surprised how often Walmart has come up on the show. I mean,
They're
like
doing
I am surprised. They're doing a lot of, especially upskilling their employees, sending them like free college opportunities. Like they're doing a lot of really cool stuff, paying them well. So they've come a long way. So Molly, make sure you like and subscribe the show so you can keep up with all the cool things that Walmart is doing.
I guess this is a good reminder that we all need to keep our minds open to learn new things about people or corporations we've written off.
Exactly. All right. The third story comes from JP Morgan, which has a second chance agenda program that's promoting the hiring of folks with criminal records. And last year, 9% of new hires came from the program. And I just think this is so important because it emphasizes skills over formal education. And that often means that more Black and brown folks are getting opportunities that they wouldn't have. People with really great skills who are probably in prison due to the war on drugs in the first place. So systemic racism. So I am all about this. Again, JP Morgan.
It's like I totally want to see the overlay of how this affects the like racial and economic diversity of their workforce hires.
Mhm.
I love I guess I'm a preacher. I believe in redemption and second chances, and think this is a really important move.
Absolutely. And I just think that we need to be emphasizing skills over experience in so many roles. And most roles or many roles don't even shouldn't need a degree. So I think this is super, super great. Okay, the fourth story this week comes from the National Park System, which has its first ever LGBTQ visitor center located near the historic Stonewall Inn in New York. So, this offers an immersive experience into LGBTQIA history, featuring powerful exhibitions and dynamic artwork, such as trans artists' piece, How Are You? With its vibrant atmosphere and poignant displays. So as someone who's LGBTQ, this is really big deal to me because there aren't very many places where our history is truly celebrated and where there's a permanent place for our legacy.
Yeah, so love this. I think it's really important. I realized this is a weird story, but 2 years ago I realized that my son didn't know how anti-gay our church denomination is, because he's always grown up in sort of pockets of it where inclusion is visible, literally like held in the arms of gay and lesbian folks his whole life. But like it's difficult to read the significance of this moment without knowing what has been. And so for people of all ages, but especially for younger generations, knowing what we've come through, knowing the stories of struggle and triumph and the brave and bold witnesses for another way, so important. I'm really glad it's in the National Park System.
I know, me too. Me too. I hope a lot of folks get to check it out. I'm planning to check it out later this summer. But I just think my son doesn't understand that. I mean, he knows it a little bit now because we talk about it, but he, like yours, he has always been in loving, supportive environments and has had to sort of learn about the oppression. And it's not always, and you're right, the triumph. So it's good to just sort of have a place where it's all celebrated and it's all acknowledged. And I just think we need to have more of it. So hopefully we have a LGBTQ museum here in Chicago. I know that there's one in New York as well, but I think we just need to have a lot more investment into these stories, into this legacy.
Yeah, I'm personally excited that in our United Methodist Church, our Archives and History program department, as led by a really talented woman who's like gone all in on recording LGBTQ plus stories in our denomination, and started a new collection and is doing a lot with oral histories right now. I'm so grateful that people are already, already, it's also been a long time, but are now investing in making sure that these stories are recorded as a part of the story of who we are.
I love it. That's absolutely. I'm so moved by your work. I really am. Okay, well, the last story this week comes from the Olympics. So Allison Felix is the most decorated U.S. Olympian. She has long believed that motherhood and elite athletic performance can go hand in hand. She's the most decorated track and field athlete, I should say. And she has now introduced the first ever Pampers Nursery in the Athletes Village that will offer a space for Olympic moms to bond, nurse, and play with their babies, removing a little stress so they can perform at their best. Feel good story to wrap things up.
Love this. The actual benefit that it provides to parents who are trying to navigate the world, in this case, the Olympics, with their little ones, and the importance of having, like, in our built environment, architectural reminders that parents are part of the community and that kids are a part of our story. So transformative and so slow in coming.
So slow in coming. And it is specifically for moms, but I do wonder, I mean, I don't know that there are any non-binary athletes with kids who are participating, or how it's set up for dads, but I will wonder about how it evolves in the future, because I think that everyone needs that kind of balance.
Right?
And it's just a good respite, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, this week's call to action is to check out my friend Julie Kratz's event in New York City on International Allyship Day on August 8th. So this event is bringing together industry-leading organizations to share best practices and keep this conversation about DEI moving forward. So check out that event. Molly, how can folks get in touch with you or stay in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way is to find my church online at Westwood UMC, stands for United Methodist Church.org, or you can find me on Instagram. I'm Rev Molly Vetter.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure all of that gets in the show notes. And it's great to reconnect, and great to hear about how our values are still shared all of these years later. We, for folks listening, we used to volunteer through Habitat for Humanity together. We were officers.
Bernadette is modest. She was like the driving force that galvanized us together into a student group our freshman year in college and got us active together, both in Boston on the North Shore and on spring break experiences.
Well, thank you. It was my first kind of starting of a business, except it wasn't a business, but it really was my first starting of things. And I think kind of a symbol of who I was to become. So
you got to become an entrepreneur, and I got to become an early adopter.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm so grateful to reconnect with you. Thank you, Molly. And folks, keep the good vibes going. We need it. There's resistance out there, but keep it going. Please share this show with folks. Please share the newsletter with folks. And if you don't already subscribe, you can get everything at 5thingsdei.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.